Iran has gone ahead and successfully test-fired a sophisticated Russian-made air defense system following years of warnings from Israel. Reports of the test came out during a recent military exercise in the Islamic Republic, where the Iranian army shot various flying objects and missiles in the air to see if their new S-300 defense system would strike them down successfully. The Russian-made system is developed to track and hit enemy aircraft from up to 125 miles away. For years, the Israeli government had been urging the Russian president to delay shipping the S-300 system to Iran, but in 2016, Putin went ahead and signed an $800 billion contract with Tehran to ship the advanced defense missiles to the country. Israel has long feared that Iran will use the missile system against Israeli planes, but Iran has continued to claim that the S-300 will be used to protect the country's nuclear installations.
By the way, these ballistic missiles are inscribed in Hebrew. Israel must be destroyed. The Iranian foreign minister Zarif said, our ballistic missiles are not intended against any country. No, they write on the missile in Hebrew, Israel must be destroyed.
Today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he will be flying to Moscow on Thursday to discuss with Russian President Vladimir Putin how to best counter Iran's growing influence in Syria. Earlier today, the Prime Minister said, quote, "There is an attempt by Iran to entrench itself permanently in Syria, with a military ground and naval presence," end quote. He then went on to warn that Iran is attempting to open a new front against Israel in the Golan Heights. Since 2015, Russia has been intervening on the side of embattled President Bashar Assad and has worked closely with Iran to prop up the besieged government. In the past, Netanyahu has sought Russia's help in thwarting Iranian and Hezbollah attempts to use Syria as a base from which to attack Israel. Since the start of the war, Israel has repeatedly attacked Hezbollah targets in Syria, including the 2015 assassination of 6 of their fighters and an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Brigadier General, Mohammed Ali al-Adadi.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has compared Germany's decision to stop Turks from holding political rallies in Germany to actions taken during the Nazi period. German authorities have so far blocked 2 gatherings. They were part of a government campaign to urge Turks living there to back the April 16th referendum on constitutional reforms.
Germany, you have no relation whatsoever to democracy, and you should know that your current actions are no different to those of the Nazi period. When we say that, they get disturbed. Why are you disturbed?
Erdogan's remarks have fanned anger across the European Union. Austrian Chancellor Christian Kern has called for an EU-wide ban on campaign appearances by Turkish politicians to avoid member countries coming under pressure from Ankara.
The Netherlands is also looking at banning the rallies.
If I would be Prime Minister today, I would declare, at least until half of April, when they have this referendum in Turkey, I would call the whole cabinet of Turkey persona non grata for a month or 2.
As campaigning starts to reach a climax in the Netherlands ahead of elections on March the 15th, the far-right Freedom Party looks set to double its number of parliamentary seats. On one policy, leader Geert Wilders told Euronews he thinks the Quran should be banned in the Netherlands, just like Hitler's Mein Kampf. Members of the Muslim community organised a meeting to report what they describe as a rising climate of extremism. Polls show that while Wilders' party will increase its seats, the other parties have ruled out an alliance.
United States lawmakers from the Subcommittee for National Security of the House Oversight Committee are on a visit to explore the possible relocation of the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Earlier today, the delegation met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials to discuss the move. The group is led by Republican Representative Ron DeSantis of Florida and is set to visit possible locations in Jerusalem for the American embassy in order to later brief both Congress and the White House on their findings.
I'm just curious, he's there, he's talking to Israelis. Is he talking to Palestinians? They obviously have a thought or two on the subject.
Of course, Palestinians have been watching this very closely, but he didn't meet with any Palestinians. He didn't meet with any defense officials. In fact, the only people he met with are the mayor of Jerusalem, the prime minister, a number of ministers of Knesset here, all of whom are very clearly pro the embassy move. And Congressman DeSantis made it clear that he is pro moving the embassy as well and basically sees no reason not to move it. We pushed him on questions like, are you worried that moving the embassy will trigger another round of violence? And he basically said, that's the future. I can't predict the future. I'm not going to worry about that. He said, and he thoroughly believes that President Donald Trump, when it comes up again in late May and early June, will not renew the waiver to hold off on moving the embassy, which is to say he will allow the U.S. embassy to move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and effectively have U.S. recognition of a united Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The European Union is gathering its foreign ministers to have serious talks with Israel over their concerns regarding an Israeli settlement policy in the West Bank. They question Israel's commitment to this two-state solution, and according to one EU diplomat, any future talks with Israel couldn't be, quote, business as usual. Things have to be said clearly to the Israelis, end quote. The idea is to establish a united front with one voiced opinion on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, depending on the facts on the ground. On the condition they remain anonymous, the diplomats briefed reporters about their discussions in Brussels. Among their chief concerns is that the ambivalence regarding the two-state solution that has been stated by the Trump administration makes Europe worry about pressuring Israel, which the EU has little influence over, to negotiate. The European Union has consistently condemned Israeli settlement policy, which it deems illegal. Land in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem has been claimed by the Palestinians as part of their future state.
To start with what we know so far about the 4 missiles North Korea fired this morning. The missiles flew about 1,000 kilometers before coming down into the East Sea, and the South Korean military says they're unlikely to be an intercontinental ballistic missile, the type of missile Seoul and Washington are most concerned about.
The South Korean military says North Korea fired off 4 ballistic missiles this morning. A defense missile official said the missiles were likely Pukguksan 2 missiles, which are an upgraded version of the intermediate-range Mustan ballistic missile. Japan has announced that 3 of the 4 missiles fell in its exclusive economic zone, one within 250 kilometers of Japanese land. North Korea on Friday threatened to launch more missiles in response to the annual Key Resolve and Full Eagle drills between Seoul and Washington. The large-scale field training drills called Full Eagle started last week, and the command post exercise Key Resolve will start next week. It's common for North Korea to fire missiles during the drills, which are set to continue through April, and experts expect the North to launch several more missiles through then.
North Korea has warned that as long as the United States maintains an anti-North Korea policy, it will continue upgrading its nuclear capabilities. In an editorial published today, the North State-run Rodong Shinmun said it'll develop all necessary means to secure North Korea's peace and dignity. It also said that as a nuclear and military power, the North won't give in to any pressure or sanctions from the international community. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also condemned today's launch, saying that it clearly shows North Korea has developed into another level of threat. He added the country will work with the U.S. and South Korea on countermeasures, and further measures will be discussed at Japan's National Security Council.
Now, we've been seeing reports out of the United States that signal the Trump administration is considering whether to redeploy U.S. tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea.
The New York Times reported over the weekend that President Trump has been discussing the possibility of redeploying tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea for the first time in 26 years, with the aim of sending a dramatic warning to North Korea. Unlike strategic nuclear weapons such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, tactical nuclear weapons usually have a small yield of under 20 kilotons. However, these weapons pose a big threat to an opponent as they can be delivered by field artillery, small bombs, and missiles. The U.S. withdrew more than 900 tactical weapons from South Korea by late 1991 upon the joint declaration of the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. However, North Korea has been continuing its development of nuclear weapons, raising calls for Washington to redeploy tactical weapons in South Korea. Some experts predict it's still unlikely tactical weapons would be redeployed to South Korea, as it could give legitimacy to North Korea's nuclear program and destabilize the wider region as well.
Meanwhile, a spontaneous music concert in New York's Grand Central Station promoting the work of alleged Syrian humanitarian group White Helmets was disrupted by anti-war protesters. Well, standing amongst the orchestra, anti-war activists held signs reading, "White Helmets are US propaganda," and "No US bases in Syria." The White Helmets have been glorified in the Western establishment and media, with a documentary on their activities even winning an Academy Award. All this comes despite the group's rather questionable reputation. That's due to members of the White Helmets being spotted at executions carried out by jihadists. The group was also caught producing fake reports like this one, in which it claims that Russian jets had killed civilians. It turned out the photograph was taken before Russian warplanes began flying in Syria. The White Helmet's credibility was more heavily scrutinized after it staged a so-called mannequin challenge for social media, faking the rescue of a person from the rubble.
Warning tonight about earthquakes here in the heartland. Scientists are sounding the alarm, saying the threat is real. We should be prepared.
John, scientists with the U.S. Geological Survey are concerned about earthquakes just to our south. They believe that the threat in Oklahoma is now just as serious as it is in California, and a strong Oklahoma quake could cause significant damage right here.
The chair was rocking back and forth downstairs, and the card table was rocking back and forth.
Betty Golmanovich lives near 84th and Center, more than 400 miles from the epicenter of the 5.6 magnitude quake that rattled northern Oklahoma in September. It was strong enough to sway this chandelier down in Texas. In Iowa, the shock waves made this stained glass swing.
This kind of scared me. It's like, what's happening?
Oklahoma's seismic activity has skyrocketed from just 2 quakes in 2008 to more than 500 last year.
These are not entirely natural events that are affecting Oklahoma.
Chris Fielding is a geologist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He calls Oklahoma's earthquakes induced.
They have drilled a lot of very deep wells, and they have injected a lot of water into those wells. That changes the conditions in the subsurface.
If Oklahoma was hit with a 6.5 magnitude quake, scientists believe the shock waves would be felt across the entire midsection of the country. In a situation like that, scientists tell me older or less sturdy structures here in the metro could potentially collapse. Anything built of brick could be at an even greater risk of potentially costly damage. And anyone walking outside near a building like this could be injured by falling debris.
That's scary.
Betty Golmanovich doesn't know what she'd do if the big one shook the metro.
You just hope and pray it never happens.
But it could happen, and if you feel an earthquake, you are inside at the time, safety experts say the best thing you can do is get down under a sturdy table, otherwise drop to the floor and cover your head. If you're outside, move away from buildings, streetlights, and power lines.
A new climate study by Italy's National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development, ENEA, has found that Venice, one of the world's most beautiful and romantic cities, could disappear within 100 years if greenhouse gas emissions are not reduced. ENEA has argued that the higher temperatures contribute to rising sea levels by melting polar ice caps. Venice may be saved by the €5.4 billion Mose Flood Barrier project, a mobile barrier that could move into place at high tide, blocking any surges of water during storms. However, there are dissenting voices on the project. Critics believe the preventive measures underestimate the magnitude of the threat.
In Italy, this issue is highly controversial. If the outcome of the ENEA study is correct and sea levels will rise in less than 100 years, it goes without saying that Venice's multi-billion flood barrier project will have to be totally reviewed. However, it is too early to say if the project will work out or not.
Researchers from the Italian National Agency Enea believe that in addition to Venice and other localities along the North Adriatic coastline, 33 more areas across Italy are seriously exposed to sea level rise and coastal flooding. The areas at risk include coastal towns in Tuscany, Lazio and Campania regions, and in the islands of Sardinia and Sicily.
Zimbabwe, the government has appealed for international help for flood victims. Heavy rains have left at least 246 people dead. The country is asking for $100 million to help those affected. Mass flooding has washed out roads, destroyed crops, and drowned livestock. The high waters have also forced tens of thousands of people into temporary government shelters. The worst affected areas are in the southern and western parts of the country.
The National Food Security Assessment Report for January 2017, compiled by an interministerial team in Uganda, says the number of food insecure Ugandans is likely to rise to 11 million by the end of March 2017.
3.5 million are in a crisis right now. 10 million are in a situation of stress. They have a meal, but a very, very poor meal.
Government officials blame the acute food insecurity on the prolonged drought that has affected the country in 2015 and 16. Many parts of eastern Uganda are currently facing acute food crisis and are depending on porridge, wild roots and leaves without access to a good meal. Those affected want the government to speed up help to them.
Really, the condition is not okay. People are completely down. If the government is just sleeping, people are dying from this village.
People are surviving nowadays by eating only one meal in a day.
The government has already taken measures to assist the affected population. It's now in the process of procuring 1,600 metric tons of maize flour and 1,400 metric tons of beans as part of efforts to help them.
At least 110 Somalis died from hunger and diarrhea within a 48-hour time frame due to drought. The deaths come just days after Somalia's newly elected president declared a national disaster due to widespread drought. Now aid organizations say more needs to be done to prevent a full-blown famine. As of February, more than 6.2 million people were affected by Somalia's drought. The UN says it needs at least $4.4 billion by the end of March to prevent a hunger catastrophe in Somalia, as well as South Sudan, Nigeria, and Yemen. Since 2000, there's been only one major famine, and it was centered in Somalia. More than 250,000 people died, more than half were children under the age of 5.
On Sunday, U.S. and state agriculture officials reported a strain of bird flu has been detected in a commercial chicken breeder flock in Tennessee's Lincoln County. Over 73,000 birds will be culled to prevent the virus from entering the food system. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said this represented the first confirmed case of pathogenic H7 avian influenza in commercial poultry in the U.S. in 2017. The facility has been placed under quarantine. Approximately 30 other poultry farms within a 6.2-mile radius of the site have also been placed under quarantine.
Monday is World Lymphedema Awareness Day. It's a disease you might not have heard of, but in the U.S., more people suffer from lymphedema and other lymphatic diseases than multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, ALS, Parkinson's disease, and AIDS combined. Lymphedema isn't life-threatening on its own, but causes painful and disfiguring swelling in different places throughout the body. The swelling is caused by fluid buildup due to damage in the lymphatic system. There are two types of lymphedema. Primary forms of the disease are all hereditary, and patients see onset anytime from infancy through adulthood. Those who suffer from secondary forms of lymphedema usually get the disease through an infection, traumatic injury, surgery, cancer, or even cancer treatments. Unfortunately, that means people who face the greatest risk of lymphedema are also some of the most vulnerable. Cancer survivors and veterans are especially susceptible to the disease. There's currently no cure for lymphedema. Treatments mostly focus on easing the pain and keeping the swelling down, usually with compression. For extreme cases, surgery might be necessary.
Finally tonight, the story of a real hero, a World War II vet who hasn't stopped helping or caring. Here's ABC's John Donvan.
Archie Fagan, 91 years old, and he keeps getting invitations to be the Grand Marshal at the parade, to be in a commercial, to throw out the first pitch. What does this guy do anyway?
We give you service with a smile.
Well, nowadays, he bags groceries at a ShopRite supermarket in Flemington, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, the sandwich is on top.
He greets the customers.
Always good to see you.
And he announces the specials.
Get a hot sandwich before they're all gone.
People just love this guy. They also love Archie's life story, straight from high school into World War II, where he survived the Battle of the Bulge.
He saw the desolation, the human misery.
And as a German speaker, because his parents were Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, he spent time in Nuremberg, where the Nazis were put on trial. Archie ran his family's own grocery store for a time, but then he eased back into this as an employee, where his charm makes him a celebrity around these parts, and he uses that to put out a message.
We owe a note of gratitude to our fighting men in all the wars.
A more important message, probably, than this one.
I love to sell pork chops and roast beef, yes.
But that is Archie's job.